The world has ended. Everything that remains of humanity's culture is stored here in this podcast, a time capsule assembled by three white dudes from what was once called the Midwest. This is not everything. This is not most things. But this is it.
Hello and welcome to another episode of This Is It, a pop culture podcast for the end of the world. I'm Sam Webb.
And I'm Gabe Webb.
And I'm Daniel Osborne.
And we here at This Is It just try to do our best to help our post-apocalyptic brothers and sisters to understand the strange landscape that we live in today. Not the literal strange landscape of the nethersphere that has bled into our reality, but actually just understanding why movies and TV shows and music are the way they are. And so this week, Gabe, I believe you have our topic of discussion.
Yes. So this is probably a topic that I think is maybe more in your two wheelhouses.
Okay.
Future, if you don't remember what wheels are, they
Yeah.
are round, and we did keep them in houses at one time.
Go ahead and explain wheels and houses.
Yeah. Wheels were similar to the gas orbs that float in the sky above you right now on your weird destroyed planets. And houses were similar to the corrugated aluminum boxes that you use to keep the acid rain off yourselves.
Yeah, I think that's a fair summation of wheels and houses.
To get all of that out of the way, the topic is sports movies.
Okay.
Oh God.
I wasn't ready for this to be an architecture podcast. I really wasn't prepared.
Okay, so the topic is sports movies, and it's weird because I was a super uncoordinated, awkward, horribly weak child who never played sports ever in his life. But I actually do think that there is a connection with me for sports movies, and we can get a little more into this in our discussion of them. But I do think at the crux of every sports movie is some sort of hapless underdog who suffers from some kind of flaw, either within himself or in the external world. So I think that's why sports movies resonated with me, even as a fantastically indoor child.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd be curious to see what you guys think are the sort of crucial components of a sports movie.
Oh man.
So I want to start by kind of rejecting the notion that this is somehow in my wheelhouse, because I tend to write off sports movies in their entirety. I tend to think that they're formulaic and stupid and just not my cup of tea. But son of a bitch, I sat down and watched a sports movie just the other day, and I found myself stupidly liking it and just being completely sucked in. I watched the film Glory Road, which is a basketball film from a few years ago, where, like Gabe said, a scrappy group of underdogs, and in this case, one of the first integrated teams in the NCAA basketball tournament system, rising up and, spoiler for a 7-year-old film, defeating the all-white University of Kentucky. And I found myself, as a kid who grew up in Lexington, the heart of UK nation, and someone who didn't like sports films, I didn't want to be at the end like cheering for this team, but at the end you're like, but they've come so far, they've done so much, and I know how it ends. I know how the story goes. It's based on a true story, but I was still just like, they better win.
Yeah, sports movies for all of their flaws can do that. A good sports movie can suck you in even if you have never played sports or enjoyed watching sports or just about anything. Did you feel like you wanted to go out and play basketball after that?
I did. I really did. And I'm very uncoordinated. I'm 6'2". I lived most of my life people saying, "Oh, do you play basketball?" And the answer is terribly. When I do, it's very not good. I played a game on the intramural team with our hall in college, and my shiningest moment was shooting this buzzer beater shot from the 3-point line and having everyone watch this ball that would have won the game fall about 3 feet short of the net. And that more or less sums up my entire basketball experience. Just like my friends and myself just watching with hope, and then watching the hope just fade right away. And that's how basketball and sports goes for me.
Well, I think that's funny because I do think one of the things sports movies do is it's a very like art imitates life and it imitates art kind of thing, where we think about sports, despite the fact that sports are also a thing that get live broadcast and we watch in person and all this stuff, that like I think a lot of the sports aesthetic in our own head, like when we're doing sports, is all influenced by sports movies. Like you think of that moment as being this buzzer beater, like pivotal moment that if you'd made it, like that would have been the moment in your version, like the movie version of this event where you're like, you know, it's slow motion and everybody's cheering and like there's some previous moment that sets it up where like, oh, I can never make a three. and then you do, and it's like, ah! And like, whereas sports are always people inventing obstacles to then overcome, sports movies are just an adding on to that, where it's like, it's really inspirational that this thing that you struggled with, now you succeed at. But I like that. I like that example because it's specifically because it tells you like how influential that you're rooting against the team that like you're probably, you know, ingrained to be for.
Yeah, it's though I don't really care that much. It definitely. I remember this back when I was more into UK basketball, this movie coming out and watching the trailer and thinking, wait, UK's the bad guys, but we're the good guys. Obviously. That's not how this story goes. But yeah. No, definitely to cheer against my entire family. But you know, the movie gets you to cheer for the integrated team, which is ultimately the right answer.
Yeah. You're not so much. And that's, I think, another thing that sports movies do well is they make it about stuff that's not sports at all. Like, there's a lot of sports movies that are about, like, if this team wins, then racism is defeated.
Yeah.
That's a strangely common thread in sports.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I like that that example, especially since in the movie, like sort of the big bad guy is Adolph Rupp, the UK basketball coach, who I only know because he is the namesake of the basketball arena that the University of Kentucky plays in. It's
the center of Lexington, like the crown jewel of downtown Lexington is Rupp Arena. I was watching it with my wife and we were talking and she said, wait, the racist villain's name is Adolf? This is not real life. I'm like, yes, it's a totally true story.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Old school baby names, man. They'll get you every time.
But yeah, Sam, what you were saying about inventing obstacles is definitely a thread throughout all of sports movies, in that a central theme of almost every sports movie is sport functioning as a mirror of some sort of other internal struggle of the characters or the teams or whomever. Like you said, race being a pretty prominent one in Glory Road, but also Remember the Titans is a notable race-based sports film.
I've not seen Remember the Titans in years, but I was shown that so many times in elementary school and middle school as like, you guys in basically all white schools. So it didn't have a race function, but like, you guys need to be a team and work together. If you put that in front of me, I could probably quote the whole film line for line.
Oh yeah, that was the like the movie of choice anytime that you had like a particularly lazy substitute or yeah, especially if you were in a history class or anything that they could somehow they go to Gettysburg, so it's a historical film, and it's based on true events. I don't mean to belittle the actual story of that movie, but no, I think that's one of the tragic things is that movie is so like universally sort of accepted as a great movie to show kids that it ends up getting kind of burnt out in the hearts and minds of many people in our generation because we've seen it too many times. And one of the things it does that I think is kind of interesting is that obviously the main theme is sort of two high schools that are integrating, but it has this backdrop that a couple other movies that I think of when I think of sports movies are because they go to Gettysburg and like they go on this like jog in their training camp before the school year starts, and they're like, yeah, like we hate each other, and then they go to Gettysburg, and he's like, a lot of people died, and he talks about the Civil War, and I think that in a lot of sports movies, we get this. Sports movies are basically war movies where nobody has to die. Like that's a weird thread, but like you got that, and then you've got like Miracle, which is the hockey movie about how it's basically the Cold War, but with hockey instead of actual fighting.
Yeah, the Miracle on Ice was basically the biggest battle of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
The biggest single direct conflict.
and that's what what happens is that similar to war movies where usually they're historical and you kind of know what's going to happen, sports movies, the team that's the good guys, even if it's not like a major conflict, like where it's actual, like there's real stakes, even if it's just about like a scrappy group of underdogs, like it's only a good movie if they win. So all of the watching that you're doing is kind of them setting you up for something you already know is bound to happen. Like, and that's why occasionally sports movies subvert that, and that's why I think that that Rocky is a good example of a sports movie that has a lot of those same tropes. It's got the training montages and the underdog status and all that stuff, and so you're kind of set up for like, okay, this guy he's an underdog, he's getting set up to lose, but he's gonna win because he's the scrappy underdog, and then he loses, like spoiler, but it's because he tried so hard that it's a good movie, and it plays on that like that narrative of like if you spend a lot of time with an underdog, they have to be the winner.
I was just gonna say that I think there's really something about sports movies that really irks me and bothers me is that how much it lies to you, because it gives you two fundamental lies. The first is that training and practicing is fun, that the grueling slog to being a boxing champion is set to inspirational music and is fun and is fast, like 15 minutes tops to be a champion. And as someone who you know, for the first time in my life is starting to run, like the idea of chasing a bike through downtown Philly, that does not sound fun. That sounds painful, and that sounds hard, and it's not ideal. It's the hardest part about sports turned into the easiest and best part of the movie. And the other thing for both Glory Road and Remember the Titans is this idea, even in true stories, they sometimes bend the facts to make everything happen in a year. Like, if you work hard, it just takes a year and you can be the champion. When in reality, like a new coach, a new star player, a new this, that, a new number of things, it takes time to build that up, and it takes more than one season of really hard work to be a champion. It basically takes a lifetime.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. I do think sports movies, for being when sports movies are based on actual events, they're the ones where like you can pretty well like pull exactly what happened because there's a record of like the points scored and which teams like won and lost every year, and yet they still decide to bend all that stuff to the will of like, no, it's even though this is based on a true inspirational story, it's just not inspirational enough. We have to bump it up a couple notches. But Gabe, what are your go-to sports movies?
Okay, so we've touched a lot already on the concept of the hapless underdog being an essential component of the sports movie. And as I was thinking about what to choose in preparation for this episode, that is the direction I just ran headlong into: hapless underdogs. And I actually came up with several different, as I was thinking about it, I came up with several different variations of the hapless underdog.
Nice.
From which to choose sports movies. And I actually wound up with a lot that weren't really sports movies, but are kind of sports movies. So I came up with 4 categories of hapless underdog.
Whoa.
Okay.
So 1, hapless underdog for lack of skill. So the 0 to hero kind of metaphor that we've sort of already touched on with like Rocky, you know?
Yeah.
And then the inner demon underdog. So like a team or an athlete who is kept down by some kind of chip on their shoulder or like internal dysfunction. So like Remember the Titans with like racial divides within the team, keeping them from being high achievers, even though individually they are all strong football players. They can't come together to win a game unless they learn how to resolve these tensions within the team.
Right.
But then, so this is where I sort of go off the rails a little in terms of like, what is a sports movie? When we come to 3, which is underdog because of perception of others. So like the main character may be skilled, but because others perceive them as different, they are undervalued as a competitor. And the movie I bring to the table with this is Babe, which is at its core a sports movie about a pig who wants to be a sheepdog.
I had no clue that that we would be talking about Babe in the sports movie category. But you're so right.
I mean, yeah. The climax of the film is a sheepdog competition where Farmer Hoggett takes Babe to compete against other, we'll say, traditional sheepdogs.
Conventional sheepdog.
Right. Sheepdogs. And Babe proves his worth as a competitor. And it even has so many of the other like tropes of a sports movie because Babe was coached by the like female sheepdog, as the male sheepdog looked on in horror and disgust that his sport would be defiled by the entry of a pig.
Yeah, it's got even has kind of the trope of the sports movie inspirational speech in the form of the bar am you.
And am I wrong? Based on a true story, I think, right, Babe? No, that's not the thing.
Oh my god! But if it was, yeah, that's excellent. That was category number 3, right?
Yes.
I can't wait for 4.
Okay, in category 4, is, I guess, less of an archetype of the hapless underdog so much as like a byproduct of it. And that is the paradoxical underdog, which is a really lazy name given the concept I'm about to explain. Because the inspiration for it came from the movie Flubber, which is also a sports movie.
It is. It's a sports movie. I totally forgot there was basketball in that.
Yeah. It has bouncing. That's basically sports all the time.
And I know I'm not the first person to like point this out, but Flubber gets at the like paradoxical angle of the underdog in sports movies, and that the hero basketball team succeeds because of Robin Williams' intervention of adding Flubber to their shoes, giving them incredible bouncing ability. So like it's a pretty well documented thing at this point that in Disney movies especially, whenever the underdog or the hero of the film uses some kind of bizarre extra means to win, we sort of go along with it. Whereas like if the other team wins, ultimately they lose because of some bizarre minor technicality, and we also go along with it.
Yeah.
Wait, are you referencing like Air Bud? Because there's nothing in the rule book that says a dog can't play basketball.
Hey man, that inspired like 14 Disney Channel original movies. Like, there's nothing in a rule book that says so and so can't play such and such.
That's also a scene in Babe, in that like Farmer Hoggett gets pulled aside and he says there's no rule that says a sheepdog has to be a dog. I almost said sheep. A sheepdog is definitely not a sheep.
Wait, why are you judging that a sheepdog can't be a sheep?
I mean, yeah.
Did you not watch Babe?
Logic.
You really missed the point of Babe.
Also, is Babe the first sports movie since like Rocky to be nominated for an Oscar for Best Picture?
Oh my god.
Man, Forrest Gump had a lot of sports in it, but I wouldn't call it a sports movie.
Anyway, I thought I was going to be controversial by coming in and trying to argue that Pitch Perfect is a sports movie, but then Gabe comes in with Babe, and I feel the wind totally taken out of my sails.
Gabe, as far as your Flubber type underdogs, that you talking about them using a secret, like basically a cheat to win, kind of made me think of, and it's not a great example of that, but it made me think of course, Michael's Secret Stuff from the millennial classic Space Jam.
Yeah.
Where the pivotal moment is that like Michael Jordan gets kidnapped by cartoons who are fighting against aliens, and they're getting beat because the aliens are cheating, and he gives them a water bottle of Michael's Secret Stuff, which makes them all super buff and crazy. And then it turns out that it was within them all along. But he did. It is kind of an example of the when the bad guys use something that like beefs them up, it's a bad thing. But when the good guys do, it's inspirational and positive.
Yeah, but I would also say that plays into category 2, inner demons. They just didn't realize that they had it within them the whole time.
I think it is more of a category 2, but that scene is kind of playing on the category 4. Like, until it's revealed that there was just water in that bottle, we're thinking like, oh, weird that Michael Jordan had some sort of steroid juice just like sitting there.
There's a part of me that wants to say that there is actually a really interesting intersection of constitutional law making Space Jam possible, but the sentence "there's constitutional law making Space Jam possible" is more interesting than the story telling about how that's true, so I'm going to leave the sentence at that.
Yeah, future, you can Google. I mean, obviously, in the future, because the Space Jam is law. But everybody get up, it's time to slam now is your Declaration of Independence.
I really hope that the Space Jam website is still intact by the time this gets handed down and opened out of the time capsule, because as of today, it still is.
But do we all like Space Jam?
I love Space Jam.
Yeah, Space Jam is great.
Yeah, I think that there was a moment, if you were below a certain age when Space Jam came out, where it's immutably positive. But I do not think of it until you brought up stuff that made me think of Michael's Secret Stuff. I do not think of it necessarily as a sports movie. I just think of it as like a cartoon romp that that taught me that female bunnies are pretty.
That's a laugh of recognition, not of mockery.
Yeah. We talked about Space Jam. We talked about Air Bud. We talked about Babe. Where do we go from here?
I wanted to bring up one thing, especially since I already sacrificed my growing up in Kentuckydom, and I know that Gabe grew up in the great state of Indiana. I wanted to sacrifice the movie Hoosiers on the altar, because Hoosiers teaches us a very important point, and that sports movies, especially around team sports, are about unity. It's about unifying the team and getting the team together so the audience can cheer for the team. But the reason that it's fair to pillory Hoosiers is because it is the opposite of Glory Road. Hoosiers is about a team of scrappy, plucky, down on their luck white farm boys going against the integrated South Bend team. And you, watching the movie, want these white kids to win, even though they come from more privilege. It's implied more privilege than the South Bend team. And I just felt like it needed to be called out that you're not out and out cheering for segregation, but it's uncomfortable watching Hoosiers today.
Huh. I've actually never seen Hoosiers. I realized when we were talking about sports movies that probably would come up, and then I can't really bring much to that table.
So Gabe, as a resident of Indiana, well, both of you as past or current residents of Indiana, how does that make you feel?
This is, it's been a long time since I've actually watched Hoosiers all the way through. And definitely, Dan, what you're saying does ring true about it. But much to your point comparing it to Glory Road, because University of Kentucky and Indiana University are probably two of the, if not the two most storied basketball programs in the country in terms of college sports. Indiana's heyday sort of coming a few decades ago. So it does actually, now that I'm even thinking about it, more ring a little disingenuous to be like, yeah, Indiana, that scrappy basketball program, when in reality there was a time where they were, a perennial contender for a national championship. I don't know, maybe that's giving the historical context of the film too much weight.
I mean, and even if on the collegiate level, Indiana was a contender, I mean, Hoosiers is about, I think, like high school kids. So that's not necessarily, I don't think it's unfair to say that, you can have bad basketball players in Indiana.
Right.
Oh, I think it is. When I moved here, I became a much better basketball player. My dribbling just, I felt like a dribble improvement almost immediately.
I also do always forget that movie is about high school. I just always have it in my mind as college, probably because of Hoosiers.
Yeah, the name Hoosiers and all that red.
But even still, this is a state where basketball is ingrained in society, so readily that it does feel weird to just be like, yeah, they're gonna they're gonna beat those people. I don't know. It's no Babe.
Yeah, as a sports movie, it's no Babe, but it's sort of similar to the as far as like it being sort of a weird underdog story to the movie Friday Night Lights, which is about like a college town or a football town, like a small town in Texas that like their high school football team is like the lifeblood of the town, and really the whole drama of the movie is that they have this like hot shot player who gets injured in the first game of the season. And so it's not about like a team that's coming together from nothing. It's actually, if it were a true story, which it might be, it's actually a better example of not dramatizing the events like Dan you were talking about with some of the other stuff, where it's a very believable but ultimately thus a lot less interesting story, where it's like, we were a good team with one really good player who got beat up, and now the rest of our good team had to figure out how to still be good. Like with and in football, it's kind of you can do really well with a single like excellent player, but it's still a team sport. Like you can't literally put the team on your back, and so it's sort of, and that's another movie, another example, spoiler alert, of a team that like works really hard but then loses. They work as hard as they can to get to the state championship game and then like lose by an inch, and it's sort of like, oh man, this was a movie about a pretty good football team who lost one player and then turned out they were just one player away from actually being a successful football team. It's not a great, when you really break it down as a plot, it's not a great movie. But it's another that subverts that category.
Yeah, and it subverts being a team movie that rests on, like, usually it's about, the coming together and the greater than the sum of the parts. So like, nope, team's one guy. It's one guy, the rest of us are filler.
But that is the thing, is that they do have to come together. But it's like, what was this one dude doing that was keeping you from being a team? Like, one underdog story that I feel like we haven't mentioned yet that I think is fun, because it's like two underdog stories fighting with each other, is the Mighty Ducks.
Okay.
Do you guys remember this movie?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
It was only my complete inability to skate that kept me from inspiring going into and having a hockey career.
Oh, absolutely. Well,
is that one little thing.
That is another thing that sports movies do, is like we talked about with Dan wanting to play basketball after Glory Road. I so desperately wanted to play hockey after watching the Mighty Ducks movies when I was little. Like it just, that movie existed in a world for me before I had ever seen a hockey rink, like, or been on ice. Like, so it predates my ability to skate in any capacity, which has never gotten good. And I also was growing up in a part of the country where like youth hockey really wasn't a thing. And so Mighty Ducks kind of introduced me to the concept. But because I watched it when I was so little, it wasn't until I looked back on it recently, just like literally in my memory, that I remembered that like the first one, the coach is kind of an asshole.
Yeah.
Like that the story is as much about him getting himself together as it is about this like scrappy team getting themselves together. Because he's only a coach because he has community service that he has to do.
I totally forgot about that.
Yeah. He's like a high-powered lawyer who has, talk about like internal demons. He's got like a checkered past from when he was little, and his father died, and then he was in the championship hockey game and had like missed some practices because of his father dying, and he missed this like penalty shot that lost his team the like awesome would have been the champions team. He misses the penalty shot and that loses the game, and that's like when he rejects hockey. And so he becomes this high-powered lawyer. He's all cynical and mean, and he's out celebrating his big win on a case where he gets too drunk and runs into like a pole or something, and then gets sentenced to community service, and that's how he becomes the coach of this ragtag group of kids. And like the first part of the movie is him like yelling at them, and so like for not listening to him or doing things his way. And so it's like equal parts him helping the team get themselves together and the team helping him. But like, I don't know, it's just a weird example of a sports movie because it has all the notes of like a ragtag group slowly gets themselves together, they believe in themselves. But then there's this whole other thing going on where this guy basically has an unresolved trauma around his dead father that is centered on a single hockey shot, and he has to get over that. And then at the end of the movie, he's so into the idea of being this coach that somehow this hockey team gets pitted against his job as a lawyer, and he decides to give up his lawyer job for this unpaid coaching position. Like, that's how that movie ends. That's the redemptive ending of Mighty Ducks that I totally forgot about until I like revisited it recently. Is that he's a high-powered lawyer who decides to be a volunteer coach for a living at the end. But then they get to like fight the Russians or whatever in the second one.
Iceland.
Iceland. Close enough.
Who cares about that place?
Well, any other contributions we need to make to the time capsule for sports movies?
I want to throw one thing out there.
Please do.
And that is going back to my category 3, sports movies. Heroes fighting the perceptions of others, keeping them from competing. Because I actually think that it's notable that premise is actually built almost entirely for movies where girls are trying to get on teams for sports that only boys play.
Yeah.
In whatever weird community they're a part of. Because actually I think so far none of our contributions have a notable female presence other than maybe the female sheepdog in Babe. And I mean, there's certainly Bend It Like Beckham is probably maybe the most notable example of this. But the fact that almost all female-centric sports movies are relegated to this one weird niche, I think speaks a little bit to the bro culture of sports and cinema.
Oh yeah.
Well, and A League of Their Own, I guess, is maybe slightly more than Bend It Like Beckham.
Those are both good examples. If you want to look at a bunch of terrible examples, all of the Disney Channel original movies where they just were like, spin a wheel of disenfranchised people and spin a wheel of sports. Whatever the two, like whatever it lands on, that's what we're going to make a movie about. Because there was like one about a...
Whatever. You love Johnny Tsunami.
Johnny Tsunami. You've got the Alley Cat Strike. You've got Motorcrossed, which is...
Wow, you are doing way better than I could.
Motorcrossed, which is about a girl having to dress up like her brother to compete in motocross competitions.
What's that movie Brink about roller skating?
Yeah, that was about like the street skaters being allowed to be on like the professional roller skating team. Let's see. You've got that one that was about Gotta Kick It Up, which is the Latina dance team movie. There was one where Shia LaBeouf was the lead in a all Jewish basketball team.
Oh,
like youth
what?
basketball team. Like I'm telling you, like they genuinely just spun a wheel and matched up like a group and a sport. Like Alley Cat Strike is literally like that wheel landed on cool guy who's good at every sport, and then they matched it up with the one sport he isn't good at, which is bowling. And the premise of that movie is that the same actor who played famous Jet Jackson needs to win at every sport in his school, and the only one he has left is bowling. That's the underdog story of that movie. Is that this guy is good at everything, but turns out he needs help from the quirky bowling team to win at bowling.
Alley Cat Strike sounds like a terrible brand of cigarettes.
Oh yeah, or just like a tattoo parlor that has never actually had anybody inside it.
This Friday on the Disney Channel, Shia LaBeouf is too white to be a jockey.
The one thing that I think we haven't quite touched on, and except for Gabe, with your talking about like the bro culture, is that there is this assumption that the audience for sports movies cares about sports in a way that's beyond like points or like who wins, and that it's more about like why so many, like very few other types of movies can so comfortably play in like youth or high school age narratives and have it be dramatic. But I think that because sports touches this idea that they assume everybody has of like youth, like is about getting outside and like competing with one another and like learning to work as a team and all this stuff. And so it's a very easy vessel to like touch on nostalgia. And I think that the best example of that is The Sandlot.
Classic.
Yeah, which is a great movie. I really enjoy The Sandlot, and it's not really. And part of why I enjoy it is that it's not about sport. Like the game of baseball is sort of like the setting more than it is anything else. Like they don't need, like they genuinely just play all the time, and they say at one point that they don't keep score. Like they just play.
Yeah,
and
to borrow a turn of phrase from you, baseball is the context, not the conflict.
Yeah. Like the conflict is like a mythical creature basically in the form of a giant dog and also stepdads. Like just the concept of stepdads is kind of a stressor. But yeah, I think that The Sandlot is a good example of like where sports is so assumed to be like in the cerebral cortex like of everybody's vision of their childhood that they don't even have to be like. There is like a baseball plot. It's not what anybody talks about in that movie. Like all of the stuff they talk about is like when they're hanging out in tree houses and just that this kid gets to belong, and that the movie is actually really sports is in that case a metaphor for like belonging in a way that really doesn't resonate unless you're somebody who started playing sports when they were little and continued to play them and like that's all your best friends. But I think sports movies do sort of assume that that's their audience.
I mean, it certainly played out in my life.
Yeah. I mean, for the listeners, Dan, Gabe, and I met when we were all
legless and playing billiards.
Yeah, we were a group of no hands billiards players. We invented the sport. And so that was really the ultimate underdog aspect of it, was that we had to find people who would play billiards the same way we did so we could win at that. But, you know, we triumphed in a way that I don't think anybody else ever has.
Coming in 2018 from Lionsgate, the Nose Rollers.
I mean, and if Lionsgate passes, there's always, all we'd have to do is fabricate a no arms, no legs wheel and a billiards wheel, and we sell it to Disney Channel, Lickety Split. Which Lickety Split, also a better name for a bowling movie than Alley Cat Strike.
Ooh.
All right.
Ooh. I don't like lickety.
No, yeah. I was gonna say I have to agree to disagree with you there.
I'll put it in these terms. Just as much time was spent coming up with that name as Alley Cat Strike, in terms of like, oh, it's got a bowling word in it.
Yeah, truth.
What do we have for the time capsule? We've got Glory Road, Remember the Titans, Rocky, Miracle, the Babe, Flubber, Space Jam, Hoosiers, Friday Night Lights, The Mighty Ducks, just that spinning wheel of Disney Channel movies, and The Sandlot. Anything else we need to add, or are we good to...
I mean, I feel like this is pretty comprehensive. I like it.
Yeah. I think we've covered a lot of ground here today, and I'm proud of us.
I say we seal it up.
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. Be racist.